So after teaching my lesson on rotation in Mr. Antonian's geometry class, I feel as though the weaknesses I had definitely were greater than the strengths. But the strengths that were present in my lesson were that I spoke very clearly and loudly, and I used as much vocabulary as I could in the moment. It was the first lesson I had ever taught to a class, so I was extremely nervous. And considering that fact, I thought I played it pretty cool and didn't show my nerves too much to the class, hoping to keep them as engaged and as excited about the lesson as possible. I also created a visual lesson and a very hands-on lesson. So actually being able to rotate that little square and watching the shape move from quadrant to quadrant is a really exciting way to do transformations. Previously, my master teacher did transformations graphically and without any physical manipulation. So I wanted to include that for the students who still weren't grasping the concept and who also are a little more visual learners. And it's more fun to have something that you get to manipulate with your hands and you can actually see the change go on as opposed to just graphing different points. I also tried really hard to bring in prior and real world knowledge by starting the class off with, hey, you guys, what do you think rotates in the real world? And just getting their mind wrapped around the concept that rotation is an object being moved around one point. So we even brought up the game of life and Twister because that is what the hands-on materials really resembled, was that of a game spinner. So I'm also really proud of my lack of no in the class. I try really hard to make sure that every student, when they give input, I don't shut them down. I consider their answer and take the time to listen to their reasoning and make sure that they are thinking through what they're saying as well as me. I am not a genius by any standards. I do love math and I've studied it for a very long time, but I have no doubts in my mind that a student could come up with a different way of solving a problem than even I know. So I was really proud to be patient in the classroom and hear the students out as they chose to participate. Well, my weaknesses were many. I really wish that this was executed in groups. That's how I initially wanted it to play out. My master teacher was not comfortable putting this particular class period in groups and allowing them to work. I think they've had behavioral issues in the past, and he didn't want my lesson to be interrupted by that. Despite the lack of group work, I thought that the students were half engaged and half not. And I thought group work would have really pulled those other students in. Even if it was reluctantly, they would have had to be a part of their group and discover what the rules were or the formulas were for rotation. It would have been much more engaging, exploratory, and also, I really believe, memorable. I also wish that I had made up a formula after each rotation that we did, instead of going through and saying, okay, go back to the starting point, now we're going to rotate this way. Okay, back to the starting point, we're going to rotate this way. I wish we had done a rotation and then come up with a rule. Although the data sitting in front of the students really did help them to derive those formulas so they could see the change across the board on the table, I really think that it would have been more intuitive as a lecture to say, okay, this is 90 degrees counterclockwise. What difference can we notice between the starting point and the end point to come up with a rule? That was another thing that really bothered me through the video, is using the word rule versus using the word formula. My master teacher uses the word rule when it comes to rotation and reflection and translation in general. And I really force that word formula upon the students in that class period. That inconsistency can really confuse students, so I was really disappointed that I didn't keep it all very congruent for them. Although I thought it was going to be a really fun part of class for students to make the spinners where they spun the graph paper around, I really wish I had pre-made the materials. It took about 5 minutes in class for them to put these together, and some of them were playing with it, and that's all fine and dandy. I want them to have fun during math, but wasting time during a 50-minute period is just taking away from learning. So the next time I implement this, it will certainly be in groups and the materials will be pre-made. I also wish that I had spent less time with my back to the class. I think part of it was that I had never used a smartboard before, so I really wish I had practiced prior, but I didn't really have an opportunity to do so. And my master teacher started class off with a lecture himself, so I didn't have much time to manipulate with the markers and the erasers. So considering it was my first time ever using a smartboard, I thought I did okay, but there are definitely parts of the video where students are yelling at me to push buttons and to pick up a certain marker, and that was a little chaotic and overwhelming. I also want to increase the effectiveness of my lessons in the future because, like I stated before, the engagement of the class, it was about 50-50. I've noticed a lot of students have checked out already since I've been observing since the beginning of the year in August, and this lesson was taught in October. But it's really no excuse to just allow students to check out. I think group work would have really engaged the students, especially the ones that don't usually engage. They would have had their peers to kind of keep them in check, and I think it's just more fun to be, in a group and with your friends and being able to, physically manipulate materials and discover something new together and have that experience. So that's definitely one way that I want to increase the effectiveness of my future lessons. I also really want to practice more. That was my first time in front of a class, and I really just am now dying to get up there every single time my master teacher is and teach something, because it was really nerve-wracking to be in front of the class. As they say, don't be the sage on the stage, be the guide on the side. The group work would have really allowed me to do that. I don't know if I know how to be a sage on a stage, so maybe that's something I don't really want to get used to. But having to lecture and be that leader in the classroom, it was a little scary. So I would like to continue to practice that and get better at just being in front of a classroom and commanding a classroom. I also want to start the class off with a list of vocabulary words. I want to write them down on the board and refer to them as we're talking about them. One word specifically that I pointed out was the word origin, and I wish I had written it down on the board and, had a student stand up and state what their personal definition of the origin was instead of saying, "Do you guys know what an origin is?" I think that this verbal connection to the actual physical connection or visual connection of the word is really powerful. Because in math, we have a lot of very complex words, and saying them and looking at them can feel a lot different and not as intuitive. So that's definitely something that I want to do to improve in the future. My theoretical focus for this lesson was constructivism. I absolutely love constructivism. I think it is one of the best learning theories out there. I get really excited about it. I think I connect with it so much because that's how I learn. So constructivism in this lesson played a huge role because students were able to physically manipulate the materials on their own and create their own understanding of what it means to rotate that object. So they are sitting there individually looking at that paper, rotating it, and saying, okay, what is happening to this shape? What is happening to the points? What is happening to the vertexes? And then from there, they can kind of interpret it. They can kind of interpret that manipulation on their own. So social constructivism also played a role in my lesson. Towards the end, I got the whiteboards out and we were plotting points, and man, those kids are smart. They realized they didn't have to draw another shape. They could just rotate the board because they're smart. I didn't even think of that idea. So socially, I thought that they were, kind of debating over rules and saying, oh no, yours isn't right, look at mine. And that stuff gets me really excited because it means that they're talking about math, which to me is a rarity in the math classroom. Connectivism also played a small role in my lesson. I wanted students to connect what they've been learning in the past about rules and formulas for manipulating those polygons and those triangles on a grid, and the tables that they're associated with, and all the vocabulary that they need to know in order to execute that and to explain their reasoning for why you can move something 180 degrees around the origin, or even why you can move an object to the left one. What does that mean in rule form? So I was really glad that I was able to integrate those two learning theories into my lesson. But overall, I was really proud of myself, for implementing that lesson and coming up with something so creative. That class is very used to a traditional teacher, so someone that gets in front of the classroom, lectures, gives them classwork, and sends them home with homework. So I was really glad to mix things up, and I was really happy with how the students responded. And even though it was only 50% of the class, the kids that were engaged, I was so happy to see on their quiz about rotation and reflections that they did really well and they remembered their rules, and a few of them even referred back to the materials that I made. So despite my long list of weaknesses, I would like to end with saying that I'm very happy with how my first lesson ended, and I have learned so much by just watching one video of myself. I can only imagine how far it's going to take me when I tape every single lesson that I do. Thanks.